The Rocky Road of American Heavy Tanks, a tale of big dreams and bigger setbacks. Picture this, a massive steel beast, weighing tons, roaring across the battlefield, crushing everything in its path. That's not just a tank, it's a symbol of raw power, engineering genius, and military strategy. But what happens when a nation builds these incredible machines and then never uses them in combat? Welcome to the wild, sometimes tragic, and downright puzzling story of American heavy tanks from 1941 to 1948. This is a saga of ambition, mistakes, and missed opportunities that'll keep you hooked. Why did the United States, a powerhouse of industry, create some solid heavy tanks but fail to roll them out in battle? Buckle up, because we're about to find out. Tanks aren't just about steel and firepower. They reflect how a country plans to fight, what its army values, and how it prepares for war. Every nation that took tank building seriously had its own unique path. Germany went all in on terrifying giants like the Tiger and Panther. The Soviet Union churned out the legendary T-34 and KV tanks, blending simplicity with brute force. But the United States? Their journey was a roller coaster of highs and lows, more like trying to navigate a jungle without a map. Let's unpack why things went so wrong and what we can learn from it. The early days, America's tank game in the 1930s. To get why the United States struggled with heavy tanks, we need to rewind to the 1930s. Back then, the United States wasn't the military juggernaut we know today. The Army was small, and the budget for new weapons was even smaller. Heavy tanks? They were practically science fiction. The American battlefield, think wide-open plains and deserts, didn't need massive, lumbering machines. There are no fortified defense lines like in Europe, so the United States focused on zippy light tanks like the M2 and later, capable medium tanks like the M3 Lee. These were fast, affordable, and got the job done. Why sink cash into something big and pricey? But everything changed in September 1939. World War II kicked off, and Europe was engulfed in chaos. German tanks, like the Panzer III and IV, proved that armor wasn't just a toy. It was the key to victory. The United States realized their stay-out-of-it attitude might not hold up. On September 27, 1939, the United States officially kicked off work on a heavy tank. At this point, it was more of a daydream than a blueprint. They had two ideas: a tank weighing 45 and 4/10 tons or a whopping 72 and 6/10 tons. Guess what? They went with the lighter option, trying to balance power with practicality. The heavy tank T1, a spark of hope. Enter Colonel Gladion Barnes, later promoted to Brigadier General, the mastermind behind America's first heavy tank, the heavy tank T1. In 1940, the United States had zero experience building heavy tanks. None. But Barnes and his team didn't just copy other nations' designs. They aimed to create something unique. And honestly, they came pretty darn close to nailing it. At first, the T1 was a wild concept, a four-turret monster, straight out of a sci-fi flick or the clunky tanks of the 1920s. But Barnes wasn't messing around. By fall 1940, he streamlined it into a single turret design. The turret packed a 3-inch, 76mm gun and a 37mm gun, serious firepower for the time. Plus, the tank was designed to hit speeds of 35 to 40 kilometers per hour, making it not just powerful but fast. The team even hedged their bets by working on 3 types of transmissions: mechanical, hydraulic, and electromechanical. Smart move, because the hydraulic option turned out to be a headache. The first prototype, the heavy tank T1E2, hit the testing grounds on August 21, 1941. Here's the crazy part. From concept to a working tank, it took just 15 months. For a country with no heavy tank experience, that's a jaw-dropping achievement. By late 1941, the T1 looked like one of the best heavy tanks out there. It was fast, well-armored, and outgunned its rivals. The only downside? The hull was a bit tall, thanks to the engine, but that was a small price to pay for its power. On April 14th, 1942, the heavy tank T-1E2 got its official name, Heavy Tank M6. Things were looking up, and plans were in motion to crank these bad boys out. As early as October 3rd, 1941, Baldwin Locomotive Works got an order for 50 tanks. But here's where the trouble started. The Ordnance Committee decided one version wasn't enough. They greenlit 5 variants. Besides the T1, T1, and T1E2, they added the T1E3 with a welded hull and T1E4, welded hull for diesel engines and 2 automatic transmissions. It was like trying to please everyone at a buffet, and it slowed everything down. The T1E1, with its electromechanical transmission from General Electric, was the real showstopper. When General Barnes saw how it handled, he was blown away. "It's like driving a streetcar," he said. The tank was so easy to control that its heavy weight didn't even matter. On June 15th, 1942, Major General Jacob Devers, head of the Armored Forces, called the T-101 the best work I've ever seen. The United States was ready to go big. 230 tanks were ordered, including 60 M6, 65 M601, welded hull, and 115 Ton-1 for Lend-Lease to the British. But then disaster struck. The big letdown: why heavy tanks got the boot. On December 7th, 1942, the Army Ground Forces, AGF, dropped a bombshell. They didn't need heavy tanks anymore. Why? They looked at early fighting in North Africa and some training exercises and decided medium tanks were the way to go. Medium tanks, like the M4 Sherman, were faster, cheaper, and easier to maintain. Heavy tanks? Too slow, too clunky, or so they thought. The AGF seemed to miss that North Africa's open deserts were nothing like Europe's fortified lines, where heavy tanks could have shown. The M6 program started to crumble. The order was slashed to 40 tanks, 8 M6, 12 M601, and 22 101. Then the United States tried to cheat by upgrading medium tanks instead of building proper heavy ones. Enter the T-25 and T-26 programs, which were basically souped-up medium tanks. It was a bad call. The Soviet Union had already tried this with their KV-13, which quickly evolved into the full-fledged IS heavy tank. The United States, though, kept chasing a middle ground that didn't exist. New attempts: T-28, T-29, and beyond. In September 1943, the United States gave it another shot with the heavy tank T-28, a so-called assault tank that was more like a self-propelled gun. It was a weird, lumbering beast, similar to Britain's tortoise. Even the British, with their Churchill tank, knew how to use heavy tanks effectively. The United States? Not so much. By July 1944, it was clear the T-28 was a dead end. Then Germany rolled out the fearsome King Tiger, PZ, KPFW, Tiger Osp.B, showing the world that heavy tanks were here to stay. The United States scrambled, tried to revive the T-1E1, but it was too big and heavy. So they launched the T-29 and T-30 programs, essentially beefed-up versions of the M26 Pershing. The catch? New engines, transmissions, and turrets had to be built from scratch. Even if the war had dragged on to late 1945, these tanks likely wouldn't have made it to the battlefield. The money angle: why time slipped away. To understand why the United States couldn't get its heavy tanks right, let's talk dollars and cents. In 1940, the U.S. military budget was a measly $1.7 billion. By 1945, it skyrocketed to $81.2 billion. But even with that cash, the focus was on planes, ships, and mass-producing medium tanks like the M4 Sherman. The United States churned out nearly 50,000 Shermans during the war, but not a single serial heavy tank. Why? Shermans were cheap, easy to build, and versatile. A single M6 cost about $300,000, enough for 3 Shermans. Heavy tanks demanded huge resources: steel, engineering time, testing grounds. The U.S. war machine was built for quantity, not bespoke projects. That's why the Sherman became the backbone of the armored forces, while heavy tanks stayed on the drawing board. Could the United States have created a heavy tank to rival Germany's Tiger or the Soviet IS? Absolutely. The heavy tank T-1 was a fantastic start, modern, powerful, and mobile. The problem wasn't the engineers, it was the brass at the top. The AGF didn't seem to get what heavy tanks were for. They wanted a tank that was cheap, light, and heavy hitting, an impossible combo. If the T-1 program hadn't been axed in 1942, the United States could have had a battle-ready heavy tank by 1944. Instead, they wasted years on half-baked ideas like the T-25 and T-28. The story of American heavy tanks is a saga of big dreams crashing into red tape and bad decisions. The United States could have been a tank-building titan, but it ended up overshadowed by its allies and enemies. The Soviet IS-2, German Tiger, and British Churchill all found their place in battle. The M6? It's a museum piece. But here's the silver lining. Even superpowers mess up, and that's okay. Those mistakes led to the M26 Pershing, which paved the way for future tanks. The T-29, T-30, and T-34 laid groundwork for the M103 in the 1950s. So, maybe it wasn't all for nothing. Don't miss out on more epic war machine stories. Subscribe now. Drop a comment and let us know. Did the United States blow its chance at heavy tank glory, or were they better off sticking with Shermans? Let's get the conversation rolling.